Falter-Podcasts werden durch Werbung unterstützt. Das hilft bei der Finanzierung unseres journalistischen Angebots. Falter Radio, der Podcast mit Raimund Löw.
Sehr herzlich willkommen, meine Damen und Herren, im Falter-Radio. Die Kunstwelt bewegt dieser Tage einen Skandal um André Heller, den österreichischen Multimedienkünstler. Heller hat in Wien einen Bilderrahmen angefertigt, der so aussieht, als sei er vom amerikanischen Maler Jean-Michel Basquiat. Der Rahmen hat Nägel drauf, er ist färbig, hat kleine Papierelemente, die angeklebt sind, die tatsächlich vom Basquiat stammen. Im aktuellen Falter kann man sich das Kunstwerk ansehen, aber gefertigt hat das der André Heller und nicht der Basquiat. Zum Kauf angeboten wurde dieser Rahmen um mehrere Millionen $, verkauft vor ein paar Jahren um $800.000, weil der Käufer im Glauben gelassen wurde, dass der inzwischen weltberühmte Basquiat das Ding gebastelt hat und nicht, wie es wirklich war, der kreative Österreicher André Heller. Der Falter hat die Fälschung nachgewiesen. Heller hat sein Werk, den falschen Basquiat, inzwischen zurückgekauft. Wir versuchen in dieser Sendung die Nachbetrachtung zu einem österreichisch-amerikanischen Kunstskandal, der auch international durchaus Wellen schlägt. Wir werden dieses Gespräch sowohl auf Deutsch führen als auch auf Englisch, weil aus Houston Stephen Torten zugeschaltet ist. Hello, Stephen.
Hello, how are you?
Stephen Torten is one of the top experts for Basquiat in the world. We agree that we will do this show will do it partly in English, partly in German, because there we also have Matthias Dusini, der Autor der Recherche zu Hellers falschem Basquiat im Falter. Hallo.
Hello.
Let's talk first to Matthias, if you don't mind, Stephen. Matthias, wie ernst nimmt die Kunstwelt diese Affäre? Kann man das schon sagen?
Vielleicht noch eine kleine Korrektur zur Einmoderation. Also Heller behauptet ja immer noch, dass er keinen Basquiat verkauft hat, sondern einen Holzrahmen, auf dem kleine Basquiat Schnipsel picken. Das ist, deswegen kann man eigentlich im engeren Sinn jetzt noch nicht von einer Fälschung sprechen. Also das ist
aber die Leute, die das gekauft haben, denen das angeboten wurde, die waren im Glauben, das ist ein Basquiat.
Zumindest bestätigt uns das der Zwischenhändler. Mit dem Käufer konnten wir bisher nicht sprechen. Also der Korrektheit halber.
Absolut.
Die Affäre wurde breit wahrgenommen in zahlreichen auch internationalen Medien und wurde auf verschiedenen Ebenen diskutiert. Also einerseits auf dieser moralischen Ebene, warum ein so integrer Mensch wie André Heller so eine nennen wir es mal, Dummheit begeht, ohne von Fälschung oder von Betrug zu sprechen. Also sozusagen, so wir erleben eigentlich den Sturz fast eines nationalen Denkmals. Der andere Aspekt betrifft aber natürlich auch den Kunstmarkt selbst, der sich erschüttert zeigt. Ein Auktionator hat heute davon gesprochen, dass eine toxische Wirkung hätte, also vergleichbar mit der Korruption und der Politik. Die Menschen verlieren eigentlich durch so eine Intervention das Vertrauen in die Maßstäbe des Kunstmarktes, der ohnehin immer unter dem Verdacht steht, ein reines Spekulationsgeschäft zu sein.
Der André Heller ist ein vielseitiger Künstler, unglaublich viele Dinge hat er gemacht, für den es Respekt gibt, auch wegen seines Engagements gegen Rassismus, gegen Diskriminierung in Österreich. Wie sehr ist er jetzt beschädigt?
Ja, ich glaube, wenn man den Namen Heller in Zukunft googeln wird automatisch auch der Name Fälschung oder Basquiat aufpoppen. Und das ist gerade in Zeiten von Social Media, von einer sozusagen, wo Persönlichkeiten sich gerade auch digital in die Auslage stellen, schon auch ein Image-Schaden, der langfristig nachwirken kann und sozusagen dieses Bild auch längerfristig verändern könnte.
Und wie André Heller damit umgeht, ist noch nicht wirklich klar. Wir haben ihn natürlich in diese Sendung eingeladen. Du hast auch mit ihm gesprochen für diese Geschichte, aber wirklich reagiert hat er noch nicht, oder?
Er hat offensichtlich mit dem Kurier gesprochen, wo er den Falter-Artikel als über weite Strecken unwahr bezeichnet hat. Aber er hat uns bisher noch nicht konkret übermittelt, worin diese Unwahrheiten bestehen könnten. Ein Fragezeichen, das da aufgetaucht ist im Zuge der Reaktionen, dass die Galerie nunmehr behauptet, der Rahmen wurde nie um $3 Millionen angeboten. I switched to English because this is an issue concerning Stephen. So it's just a detail of the reactions in this Heller case that the gallery is saying the piece was never offered for $3 million. I think you know more about this detail, Stephen, right?
Yeah, well, first of all, I don't understand why that's a defense. And I'm in America right now, even though I live in Paris. And in America with Trump, there's this new political activity going on called whataboutism, where when somebody's criticized for something very profound, they point to the others and they say, well, what about that, what they did? It's like a little kid. I'm first and foremost concerned, whether it was 3 million, 2 million, even $1 million, the question is the ethics, the fraud, and the legality of it, and the larger picture. So I'm just curious, are they saying that because technically, if they weren't selling it as a separate work of art in America, they would be a lot less liable? Is it a legal question? Because at an ethical level, what is the difference what the price was? Plus, I have an absolute certainty that they engaged me to help sell it, and they offered it to me when they first thought I was a potential buyer. Because when I discovered it at the TFAF in 2017, I walked by the stand and I saw it, and I was startled because immediately I thought it was an imitation of a Basquiat. And I immediately recognized the drawing inside as either a true Basquiat or a print of a Basquiat, but it looked genuine immediately. And because of my experience as Basquiat's assistant, I was very much in the habit of analyzing works. Friends came to me with unknown works. So I was always discovering new things and revisiting old pieces that I had worked upon and going to every exhibition. So it was not, it was always on my radar.
What kind of event, Stephen, was that? Where you said you came by and saw the product. When was that, and what kind of event was that? Just for our the people who are following us and who don't know all the details.
Sure. TFAF is the world's, I think, the world's oldest art fair. It's from Maastricht, and this was the first time they used the Park Avenue Armory. And traditionally, they sell old masters, jewelry, and things like that, and very traditional art. But I guess because the taste of collectors had changed, they took the initiative in 2017 to go to New York. And they did the show at the same time as the historical New York Armory show.
And you saw that piece of art on offer there. That's what you saw.
I was walking through it. I was quite startled at the beauty of the event. I had no knowledge of what it was. I was invited by a friend. I spontaneously was walking in, and it was truly sumptuous, the whole atmosphere, and really, really masterful selection of art at a very higher level, and from my personal taste, much more impressive than the Armory show I had left. And I saw the piece, and it caught my eye. It was I was not invited. I literally stumbled upon it, is the word.
What's your? I mean, you're aware of the whole affair. You know all the details. In general, what's your main reaction to what happened here and what was discovered by Falter and by Matthias?
My reaction is first one of relief, because it's something that has haunted me ever since. Because I engaged myself from the very beginning to discover the truth. Because when I saw the piece, I inquired immediately what it was. And that's when I was even offered the price, because at first maybe they thought I was a collector. I was with Marcia Mercadante, my partner. We looked quite well dressed for the event. We could have passed for collectors, I suppose. And so immediately I was offered it, and I didn't want to be deceptive. So I said right away, no, I'm curious about the piece because I was Basquiat's assistant.
And you were offered, but not by Heller personally, but by the gallery representative who was about to sell it, right?
Ebby and Louis. I think it was Louis who offered me, proposed the price. And I immediately said, I actually am curious about this piece because it catches my eye. Who made it? And we started a discussion where I revealed that from 82 to 83, I was Jean-Michel Basquiat's assistant, and that it did not look like a Basquiat because it looked like an imitation of the pieces I had been known to have made for Jean-Michel Basquiat.
And what was the answer to your question, who made it?
They handed me the catalog, and they told me the story, which was that this is the catalog. And it was a small edition of a very beautiful, very sumptuous catalog done, presenting the piece to the world, a very limited edition. And they explained the story that the piece was done by Basquiat's assistant. And I said, what assistant? I know all the assistants. What year? Because I worked from 82 to 83. And they said, no, 87. And they then described a little bit what was written in the catalog. I think they basically referred me to the catalog where I read Dieter Burkhardt's text and the interview with Heller and was startled to see my name and a reference to my work and the crossbar stretchers. Referring to an interview from Dieter Burkhardt from 2010 and referring to my work as Basquiat's assistant and referring to the crossbar stretchers. That's the name that the stretchers that I devised for Jean-Michel that the art world has come to call crossbar stretchers, which means the corners stick out. And I said immediately, it looks to me like it was made by a cabinet maker in Vienna.
Well, that was a good guess, yeah. Though Heller is not a cabinet maker, but it was Vienna is sort of came to your mind. That's
Did you know André Heller at that time?
I had never heard of André Heller, no.
I mean, I have more general questions. I just wonder if Matthias, do you want some precisions? No, I would like just for our viewers, just to give us a bit of a picture and a feeling for Basquiat. We have in Vienna today a fantastic exhibition of paintings of Basquiat in the Albertina Gallery, where you really feel the power and the imagination of this artist. What was it like to work for him? You worked 2 years for him, is that correct?
Over the course of 1 year.
1 year.
With a slight interruption. So from the summer of 82 to the summer of 83.
What was he like, and what was your? How did you feel the way he's operating at that time?
I think he was one of the most conscious, awake, determined human beings I've ever met in my 65 years. He was younger than me by 3 years. I had already lived in Europe. I spoke French. I had just moved back from Berlin, where I lived in 80 to 81. And so I had come across many fascinating characters. I had already had 1 year of university and met fantastic professors. And I have to say that when I met Jean-Michel, his articulateness, his intention, his work habits, his sophistication, his knowledge was startling from the very beginning. It was quite a beautiful ride.
I mean, Basquiat was friend with many famous people, Andy Warhol or Madonna, but he had started as a guy who was doing graffiti in New York City. What made him so extremely successful in such a short time? Because he died when he was 27.
Yeah, well, at the time I worked for him, he was 22. I was with him the day that he officially met Andy Warhol, although there is that famous story of him going in and selling a postcard to Andy Warhol when he saw him enter a restaurant with Henry Geldzahler. When I went with him on October 4th, 1982 to the famous lunch where they exchanged portraits, the first thing that Warhol said when Jean-Michel walked in is, "Are you still selling your work for $1?" So they had a very beautiful friendship. And I think that's maybe not a direct answer to your question, but he was charming. He was he could speak many languages. He was not a man of many words. He thought and stuttered when he talked. He was a bit timid in his speech, but he was brilliant and always surprised people. That even he always seemed distracted. He was always drawing. He never seemed to listen and always interrupted. But then he proved that he not only understood what you were saying, but could answer in a witty and intelligent way. It was quite an enchanting human being. His success was a surprise to nobody who knew him, even when he was supposedly homeless. Although I always describe him as home full, because he was very loved and he had many homes to go to. He had many lovers and gregarious families that took him in. He lived with a couple who was school teachers in the West Village. He had many places he could knock on the door because he was a very trustworthy guy. He was very soft-spoken.
It's a beautiful description, Stephen. Let me switch to Matthias for a second, if I may. I'll come back to you with some questions I do have. Matthias, der André Heller hat ja tatsächlich mit Basquiat zusammengearbeitet. Stephen hat das nicht erlebt. Zu einer Zeit, in der wahrscheinlich in Europa von dem afroamerikanischen Künstler Basquiat kaum jemand etwas gewusst hat. Das zeigt doch auch großes Gespür des Heller für spannende Künstler, die Neues machen, sich nicht in alten Pfaden bewegen. Was war das für eine Zusammenarbeit zwischen Heller und Basquiat?
Ja, vielleicht Heller erzählt ja die Anekdote, dass er in einem Live-Magazin oder Time-Magazin eine Geschichte über Basquiat gelesen hat und ein Freund zu ihm gesagt hat, der ist interessant. Also Basquiat war ja durchaus eine medial präsente Figur. Er hatte ja in der Schweiz, in Europa schon sehr frühe Sammler, auch in Italien Ausstellungen. Also er war durchaus in der Kunstwelt war er eine große Nummer. Also er war nicht...
Auch als 20-Jähriger, 21-Jähriger, als 22-Jähriger.
Ja, wie ihn Heller gekannt hat, war er ja schon ein bisschen älter und auch etablierter sozusagen.
25, 24, 25, also jung, genau, noch immer ziemlich jung.
Also das war der Hintergrund, war eben dieses große Projekt Luna Luna, eine Art Vergnügungspark gestaltet von prominenten Künstlern, finanziert von der Zeitschrift Neue Revue. Das war so ein bisschen eine schmuddelige Zeitung, aber die haben gut Geld verdient. Und
das sollte in Hamburg errichtet werden.
Genau, die wollten auch zum 40-jährigen Jubiläum sozusagen eine künstlerisch gestaltete Firmenfeier machen und haben den André Heller eingeladen, hier einen Park zu errichten. Und es sollte in einem Hamburger Park stattfinden. Heller hat dann alle Künstler, die er gerne gehabt hätte, besucht. Viele davon waren in den USA. Keith Haring zum Beispiel oder Roy Lichtenstein, der sozusagen der Papst der Pop-Art. Und er hat sie alle gepackt mit seinem Versprechen, eine Reise in die Kindheit möglich zu machen. Also das waren ja lauter hochbezahlte Künstler und er konnte ihnen nur $10.000 Gage anbieten. Und so kam auch die Zusammenarbeit mit Jean-Michel Basquiat zusammen. Die haben sich zusammen in New York getroffen und nachdem ihn Heller davon überzeugt hat von der Zusammenarbeit, haben sich hingesetzt und überlegt, was könnte man machen. Und Basquiat hat angefangen, was er halt immer gemacht hat, ja, kleine Zeichnungen, er hatte seine Art privater Mythologie, viele Symbole, teilweise rätselhaft, teilweise mit politischen Bezügen oder Bezügen zur Popkultur, zum Jazz. Das hat er auf ein Blatt Papier gezeichnet oder auf mehrere Blätter. Heller hat diese Blätter mitgenommen und die wurden dann in Wien von Theatermalern quasi auf dieses Teil übertragen, das Basquiats Beitrag zu Luna Luna war, nämlich ein kleines Riesenrad.
Das heißt, das war eine einmalige Begegnung oder hat es da mehrere Begegnungen gegeben? Ich glaube,
er hat ihn schon mehrmals getroffen. Er hat ihn dann später auch nochmal getroffen, wie er ihn für ein anderes Projekt eingeladen hat. Aber sagen wir mal so, es war jetzt keine längere, intensivere Zusammenarbeit, sondern schon sehr auf dieses Projekt bezogen.
Jetzt, Matthias, warum hat der André Heller das gemacht? Sein eigenes Werk so zu präsentieren, dass es als ein Werk Basquiats angesehen wurde. Du zitierst ihn in deinem Artikel mit dem Satz, wo er selbst sagt, das war ein kindischer Streich. Jetzt klingt verharmlosend, aber es ist Geld geflossen, sollte Geld fließen, ist Geld geflossen, ein paar 100.000 Euro. Aber vielleicht trifft das trotzdem die Sache. Vielleicht wollte der André Heller einfach die Kunstwelt zum Nahen halten, oder?
Natürlich kann man das so als Streich erzählen oder halt in einer strengen Version ist es dann halt schon der Versuch, jemanden einfach über den Tisch zu ziehen und dabei viel Geld zu lukrieren. Ich würde mal sagen, es ist vielleicht Heller hier passiert, so eine Art von Rollenverwechslung. Er sieht sich vielleicht immer noch als jener Bohem, jener junge Künstler, der im Wiener Kaffeehaus mit seinen Freunden Practical Jokes erfindet. Helmut Qualtinger, der als isländischer Dichter am Wiener Westbahnhof sich feiern lässt. Aber er ist inzwischen in einer Position, also sowohl moralisch als auch ökonomisch, wo er nicht mehr aus einer peripheren Position, also sozusagen einer schwachen Position gegen das Zentrum und gegen die Mächtigen vorgeht, sondern er sitzt eigentlich selber im Zentrum der Macht und gewissermaßen instrumentalisiert diese Position, um eigentlich sehr fragwürdige Dinge zu machen.
Stephen, let's switch back, if it's fine with you, to the 80s, to the person of Basquiat. He is the most important Afro-American artist. How important was for him this identity as African-American?
Robert Farris Thompson wrote, and Jean-Michel is quoted as saying, Robert Farris Thompson, who wrote The Flash of the Spirit and died recently, but he was a very prominent professor at Yale University on Afro culture and culturalism, and they met, and actually Jean-Michel gave him a painting. And Robert Farris Thompson wrote about Jean-Michel, and I think this was a bit later, this was 85, 86 when they became friends. I think he woke up to it. But ironically, when I first started working for Jean in 1982, it was probably the apogee. I don't know if that word translates into German. I'm not even sure it translates into French, but it was the high point of a certain kind of racial integration of America, the result of which is, because Obama was not really the high point. Obama was the reaction or the result of the high point. But in the early 80s, especially in sophisticated places like New York City, and I would dare say many cities, and even in rural places in America, even racists said, I'm sorry, but I'm just a racist. The people at least knew to apologize for racism back then. They knew it was bad. They just couldn't keep it. And Jean-Michel was kind of the result of that. He was very proud of his heritage, but he was very horrified to be treated as a Black artist. He certainly lived one of the most integrated lives with friends from every culture. The New York scene was two kinds of people like myself and Jean-Michel, who were born in New York. But the larger population of the art world were people who had come to become themselves, gays, dancers whose fathers wanted them to join the military, musicians who didn't want to go into the family business. People ran away to New York from Europe, from the interior of America. And Jean was a perfect example of somebody who had come into the art world to escape his family and to realize who he was. And who he was not a Black man, it was a free man. Free like all of us were. We were free from the pressures of society, and it was like an enclave of protection. The fact that he was Black was important, but I'm not denying his identity, but he didn't want to be a Black artist, and he did not by any way limit himself to a Black perspective. And I don't think that's how he wanted to be seen or remembered.
Did he want to fight racism also through his work?
I think he wanted Black representation, but I think he was more looking to Leonardo da Vinci and Man Ray and de Kooning and people who had come to escape horrors from war, from Europe. He was surprisingly, and I don't know, I say surprising not because he was Black, not because he didn't go to college, but whenever you meet somebody that sophisticated, you're surprised. So the surprise was just like a breath of air. You don't question where it's coming from. You just breathe deep. He was full of optimism about his own career and generosity towards all the people around him. And so I think in today's world, especially polarized New York, America, it's hard to imagine how much race really wasn't the question. I'm 65 now, so I lived through the 60s and the race riots and busing for racial integration. And that question had been answered in the 80s. The problem hadn't been resolved, but the question had been answered, that we were on a slow but constant path towards a kind of idealized society that everybody knew what the values were. And that's not the situation. So it's hard to look back now. Black Lives Matter is not the same as Black Power. And the art world was kind of outsider. So it wasn't part of any mainstream social movement. It was an enclave of people who just felt the joy of each other. Jean-Michel's friends were from every race.
Black Lives Matter that you mentioned, the issues are not very different from the issues of fight against discrimination and racism in the 80s or later and before. Isn't that the case?
I think you're right in the museum. So he was anxious to penetrate the white walls with the white people and white art. That he was interested, but at a social level, I'm separating his life as a completely almost colorblind affinity to people he respected and loved from the institutional desire to be in real museums. But even then, he wasn't part of the graffiti movement. He did not identify with graffiti writers. He was not accepted by graffiti writers who thought he didn't use spray paint the way he wrote words. He didn't make comic book characters. So he was always an outsider, first of all. He was quite the individual. And he received a lot of mockery from people who now one would associate, like when we call him a graffiti writer. He had a unique style that was poetry and was a manifesto. And it was a purporting of his self as an artist, his self as a thinker, his self as a philosopher. He wanted to be a writer as much as he wanted to be a painter. And I think that he was such an individual that any categorization is a danger. And yet,
let me ask Matthias, because we have this exhibition now in
I was
Vienna.
there at the opening, actually.
It's extremely strong. It's extremely powerful paintings, pictures. Do they Matthias, sind das Bilder? Sind das Werke, die für diese Energie des Basquiat stehen, aber auch ein bisschen für seine Zeit, wie das jetzt Steven hier beschrieben hat?
May I ask you a question, Stephen? Sorry.
Go ahead.
Do you think that if we frame Basquiat as a black artist, for instance, in this Vienna exhibition, is this a wrong framing because he wanted to be not framed as black African-American artist?
I think it's not so much the title as the ramifications of the title. For example, when he worked in Anina's basement, there was a lot of talk that he was locked in a white gallerist's basement as a black savage painting. And in the very famous interview with Mark Miller, he said, if I was a white artist, they would call me artist in residence. And so, I can remember another interview where they asked him what he thought of the art world. And of course, everybody expected him to start criticizing the crass, material profiteers. And he said, that's my friends. That's another racism to put down the art world. He was so much above these titles. That doesn't mean they don't apply. He is a black artist, and his achievement as a black artist should not be not identified. He should not be pigeonholed. In English, I'm not sure if the subtlety difference, if the identity is a label that opens your eyes to look deeper, that's fine. He's a black artist. We all have an identity. He certainly was not afraid of his cultural heritage. He was from two different cultures, Puerto Rican and Haitian. So there's the black diaspora, Latino, Taino, if you're Puerto Rican. He was not a black man, first of all. Being Puerto Rican, and if you see pictures of his mother, Matilde, he's indigenous Taino, probably. He very possibly white blood as well.
Yeah, but he was seen, of course, as a black man, because in America, if you are easily seen as a black man, as an Afro-American, the cultural reality is that, isn't it?
It certainly was. It certainly was very strong. I'm not negating anything you say. I'm just trying to put it in the context of his sentiment, because what you asked is how he wanted it. And they saw him as black. All you had to do was try and get a taxi to realize how black he was. They couldn't stop him, for sure.
Matthias, to come back to this exhibition, I mean, how do you see the strength of this exhibition in Albertina? Wie siehst du die Stärke die Aussagekraft dieser Ausstellung?
Ja, also durch Steven und die Beschäftigung jetzt auch mit dem Heller-Rahmen habe ich mich natürlich etwas näher mit dem Künstler beschäftigt und fand, dass er in dieser Ausstellung eben zu sehr mit dieser Thematik Black Lives Matter in Verbindung gebracht wird, also sozusagen als Aktivist, als Prophet dieser Bewegung dargestellt wird. Ich fand eher, was mich berührt hat oder was ich sehr stark fand, war halt diese Vielschichtigkeit eigentlich dieses Werkes, wo ich gesehen habe, da mischt jemand auf wilde Art, auf eine fast rebellische Art und Weise kunsthistorische Traditionen, die sich in tausenderlei Bezügen feststellen lassen, Expressionismus, Abstraktion, Pop Art, also es waren lauter Dinge, die er zusammenbringt mit Popkultur, mit Jazzmusik, mit afro-karibischer Kultur. Und dafür stehen ja auch Stevens Rahmen, die in der Ausstellung ja auch zu sehen sind. Er sprengt die Konventionen eigentlich dieser expressionistischen Malerei, wie sie in den 80er Jahren in den New Yorker Galerien ja groß gehandelt wurden und bricht die Erwartungen, die auch der Kunsthandel, die Galerien, die Museen in ihn gelegt haben. Also man lernt ihn hier schon kennen als einen, der was Neues gemacht hat und die Kunstwelt auch mit einer Energie aufgeladen hat, die, glaube ich, jetzt noch jeden 14-jährigen Skateboard-Fahrer irgendwie sozusagen ergreifen kann.
And the picture that had been in the frame made by Heller is also in this exhibition.
That's true, yes.
Stephen?
No. The blue
not the
picture
frame,
that's
not.
in the
Not the
museum.
frame, not the frame, but the picture that was so...
Oh, the picture that's in the museum at the Albertina presently?
Yes, exactly, yes.
Is one that he bought legitimately in 1991 approximately from the Robert Miller show. It's from a famous selection of portraits from approximately 82, 83. And that's never been in question. And it's a very beautiful portrait of a head. Some people say.
Generally, Stephen, what did you think of this exhibition? Does it really show us the Basquiat as you see him?
I think it's a good show. I don't know how far into depth of my particular very, very political and very highly sensitive reaction to things. I think it's a beautiful show. It has some beautiful pieces. It has, personally, I was happy to see Made in Japan, which is a very special piece. Ironically, from my very subjective point of view, it has one of the first pieces I made as Jean's assistant and one of the last ones. It has Flesh and Spirit is the 12-panel piece that they gave the press conference in front of, and Made in Japan is one of the first pieces. And there's a found object of a crate with a wrapped canvas on it. There's 3 pieces that I worked on. I would not call them necessarily his masterpieces, but Basquiat could manifest his brilliance in subtle ways in many pieces. I don't think it was as strong a show as it might be, but that opens, I always say the tip of the iceberg, but as icebergs are melting all over the planet, I wonder if that metaphor is going to make any sense by the time I tell my whole story. And I don't think this is the forum to do it. But what I see, unfortunately, when I go to these shows are all the things that I find wrong with them. Like anybody who's working very hard on something, I'm looking at them and thinking, what's the theme here? What is the reason for this choice? What I see in every one of these choices is what I see in every one of Dieter Burkhardt's shows is a curatorial point of view that to me is not based on excellence. It doesn't tell a coherent story. It's always littered with pieces that have some interest or some person who owns them rather than their artistic merit.
This is this is the critical view of the super expert who knows Basquiat and all on this.
Right. I don't say it's a bad show.
But I mean, for the Austrian public, I think for the European public, it's a brilliant introduction to Basquiat and what he means and what he meant. Stephen, thank you very much for your time. Best wishes from Vienna to Houston.
Thank you so much. I would like to just go on record in this, if I have 1 second, to thank Matthias, who I think took a very courageous stand. I just want to say, if you give me 20 seconds.
Well, even 25.
Okay. In Paris, there was a show at the Fondation Louis Vuitton, curated by the same person, Dieter Burkhardt. I've noticed this podcast doesn't make any mention of Dieter in this affair. And I just want to go on record as saying, to me, there's two things that stand out in this whole affair. One is there seems to be much more excitement in the world to hear about a scandal than to hear the beautiful story behind the art. So I went to Vienna and I went to the press conference and I was not invited. I was not allowed to speak. And I thought the story of some of the pieces would have been a welcome addition to the show. I have done that in the past. So I think that the scandal seems to be whetting people's appetite, press, yourselves included. And yet I think that if you discovered the assistant of an artist, of his importance, of Basquiat, I think the story of the creation of the art should be told. And I think the fact that the frame, the Heller frame, which has now been admitted to be a fraud and either a bad joke or an illegal crime, that's not for me to judge. He's now admitted that it's a fake. I'm not as interested personally in his motivations nor the ramifications. What I'm interested in is how was he able to perpetuate this? What was Dieter Burkhardt and the estate's involvement in it? And what does it represent? Why did it come to pass? And what are the ramifications of it? That's what interests me. I'm
sure that's going to be discussed in the next weeks and months. Thanks again, Stephen.
Danke. Thank you.
Danke, Matthias Dusini, der aktuelle Falter mit allen Details zum Kunstskandal. Der wird auch erklärt, wer Dieter Burkhardt ist, der Kurator der Ausstellung in Wien, in der Albertina, über den wir hier gesprochen haben. Das alles können Sie im Falter lesen, den kann man am Kiosk sich besorgen oder noch besser natürlich ein Abonnement des Falter. Da gibt es dann auch die weiterreichenden Berichte und Analysen. Die Internetadresse dazu abo.falter.at. Ursula Winterauer hat die Signation gestaltet. Philipp Dietrich betreut die Audiotechnik im Falter. Im Namen des gesamten Teams verabschiede ich mich. Bis zur nächsten Folge.